Welcome to Spill the Tea. Spill the Tea is an initiative by Scratching Collective. Scratching is a collective created by young artists for young artists to develop work at the scratchiest stages. Spill the Tea is a series of dialogue sessions looking at a range of topics that deal with arts and society. Each episode of Spill the Tea will feature a panelist of people involved in the industry.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the third and final episode of the second series of Spill the Tea under Scratching Collective. I'm Keryna and I'm the host, and today's topic is theater for young audiences. And we have here with us two creators from Elephant Talk Theater, Susie and Amelia. They are both graduates from the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. Their theater company, Elephant Talk Theater, creates theater and runs workshops which touch on sensitive topics, which address the elephant in the room. Smart name. I love it. So maybe we can start off with you guys just introducing yourselves and then we'll get into it.
Yeah. I'm Susie. I'm one of the co-founders of Elephant Talk Theatre.
I'm Amelia. I'm one of the co-founders of Elephant Talk Theatre.
What we do in our daily life.
I currently work as a writer for a kids education technology company.
And I work in a school, but I also do a bit of directing on the side. So I've got a radio play coming out written by Don Green called Your Unfortunate Servants, which was written in residence at the National Archives and will be included in a pitch for the BBC. So watch this space.
What a plug.
Include your socials at the end of this so you guys can check out their work if you're interested. So thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm so excited to have this talk today. I have also been involved in some children's theater, and I love children's. I am really excited to get to know more about your work with Elephant Talk and get into the world of theater for young audiences. So maybe we can start with the name Elephant Talk. So you explicitly deal with these hot topics, and I know your recent show, Finding Percy Erebus, is that right? You guys address topics of grief and death and illness. So I want to start off with a question asking, what kind of sensitivities and precautions do you take when talking about topics that seem taboo and choosing these topics? How do you go about choosing them? Yeah.
I would say that we initially decided to broach difficult topics with children because of that taboo, exactly because of that, because they're things that are often not discussed. Especially with children, it's often don't talk about that in front of children, they're too young to understand all that sort of stuff.
It's too dark.
Yeah.
And that was some of the responses that we had when we because we developed the piece initially at university, and when we told people, like our peers and things, that we were going to do a piece about childhood bereavement, they were all like, and that's exactly why I think it's important to do pieces like that.
In terms of the actual approach, we when we first started developing it, we were still at uni. It was part of our one of our final modules to make a 20-minute show, and there we just sort of did our own research. I think we were a little bit misguided at the beginning in that we started off by looking at the 5 stages of grief, which we've later discovered after discussing to actual professionals that that's not the best model to use at all, because that sort of implies a very linear process of grief of going through stage 1 to 5, and that's everyone's experience of grief. But since then, so we've moved away from that, definitely. So we do our own research, and we also are in talks with an amazing clinical psychologist who we regularly check in with and sort of share portions of the show with her, and just sort of discuss models of grief and ways children sort of psychological and physiological responses to grief.
And we're also in talks with grief charities in order to ensure that we demonstrate best practice and things both in the rehearsal room and in the aftercare. We offer the audiences, as well as how we tell the stories and how we communicate some of these quite difficult discussions and things. So some of the aftercare that we are going to be doing is handing out leaflets and things at the end of the show, signposting to different resources and websites and organisations. There are also opportunities through certain grief charities to have a volunteer in the audience with you who will then support people after the show and be able to discuss with them and talk with them and So that's also an option. Aftercare after they've watched the show is really important. Is there anything else to add to that?
I feel like we just did a really big list of things.
Well, but also like making sure that you support the actors and the creatives and the cast in the rehearsal process is important as well. But also like making sure that we word everything appropriately and using like models that are sort of like healthy models that then parents, if they're watching it, they can be like, that is how I might be able to broach that discussion with my child if that happens.
Something that was really important in our most recent call with our clinical psychologist was the idea of having a really explicit moment of a mother figure in the show explaining like what death is and what that means and like the permanence of it, and just for that like explicit understanding, which I feel like we had always, before talking to psychologists, have been like, absolutely not, we could not do that, that sounds horrifying, like but that's really important, that's what like children need. It's so much worse to be like
euphemistic,
like they've passed on,
they've
like
gone,
where have they gone? Like, so yeah, that's one of the
points where we jump off into the play is they believe Percy's gone and they're like, I'll go find them. And also something that our clinical psychologist said to us was that sometimes adults find things uncomfortable that children don't. So those really explicit conversations or wording things in a certain way might be uncomfortable for adults, but actually it's what children need. So,
Thank you for that. I'm really glad you brought up the point about safe measures and like precautions that you take during and after the show as well. Aftercare is really important. And I was going to ask you about that because I'm sure you guys get, sometimes during shows you might get strong reactions from the audience, particularly from the children. And besides having people in the audience, like professionals in the audience to help with that, how do you deal with that on stage as well?
So far our sharing of it, because it's been lockdown, our sharing of it have often been, so our first sharing was while we were still at uni at Central, so that sharing was mostly in front of like adult audiences, and then the other sharing that we did that did have children watch it, it was streamed and therefore they weren't in the room.
Except they were in the room when I showed it to some pupils at my school, age between 11 to 16, and there weren't any like, we had like a discussion afterwards that was facilitated by me, and we sort of like discussed the images and things like that, and they had a really good understanding of like the metaphors and things involved, and it opened some nice like I think the messages in the show are sort of quite positive, like and they're sort of things that can hopefully bring people a sense of catharsis or comfort in terms of grief. We've that's sort of been the experience of supporting the audience in person so far, but we have yet to see.
So but next year we're planning on, because our current R&D process is working towards a sort of sharing of it on the 3rd of July, and then that sharing is in the hopes of doing is in the aim of booking a 2022, that's next year, yes, tour around the UK. So that'll be when we truly get to like get into the sort of nitty-gritty of that. Yes.
Yeah, thanks for that answer. And that's very exciting that you guys are going to finally get to take this show on tour. And I'm sure that, the process is going to be ever evolving and you're going to learn new things along the way. I'm also really curious about your learning at Central and how that informs your work, because, you guys created this in Central in your final year, right? And so I'm just curious about, what are some of the theories or practices you learn at Central that inspire your work? And what are some other companies that do work, that do theater for young audiences that inspire you and that you follow?
Well, I mean, something that I saw recently was Tim Cratch's, which also explores grief and childhood. And that was on the Unicorn, I think, in 2018, I want to say, quite recently. Anyway, I saw a stream version. It was really good. And I think what I really liked about that was that, and something that Tim Cratch says a lot, is that like theatre, like, we shouldn't talk down to children. Like there were adults who were performing as the children, but they weren't doing all of those stereotypically childish sort of things that we as adults do when we're performing children. There's some sort of child
screaming
outside. You know, they because children don't think of themselves as children; they think of themselves as
no, of course, they're fully grown adults.
Yeah,
like they are
so
as old as they've ever been.
That's important. It's important not to like patronize children. I think something that we really like, a quote we really like is Perny Morales, who was the former artistic director of the Unicorn Theatre, said, children are not remotely convinced by our attempts to let them think that the world is safe because they know perfectly well it isn't. So something that we really try to bring to Finding Percy Erebus is that idea that like we're not talking down to the children. It's something that adults can enjoy just as much as children. There are things in it for everybody in different layers, and your age doesn't necessarily determine, you know, what you read into it. It's more, you know, there's for everybody in it. Do you want to add anything to this?
I'm trying to remember what the original question was. It was something about like theorists and stuff like that, wasn't it? Just to go back on track.
Central.
Yes.
Well, I think no, you go.
No, I was just going to say that something that we used in the first place, and also more so in this show as well, is clowning, which is not necessarily something that we were like explicitly like sort of taught or sort of studied, but it's something that I think we all sort of like came across in our time at Central. So that's something that we very much have used, and we've been lucky enough to have a few sort of like specialists come in on various days, and we had a sort of a clown come in last week, and that was lovely. It was a lovely day. Yes, please.
Yeah, and another thing I think that was really formative at Central was that we all met at Central, but we did a project together the year before, so that sort of was a good way for us to establish how we work and the sort of the structuring, who has what strengths, and I think that's really important when you're working on a theatre company together, to establish that early on and try out lots of things, because we have quite an unconventional sort of structure in terms of like we all just do everything. We don't have any roles, you know, no one is the director, no one is the you know, we all do a bit of the producing, a bit of the directing, a bit of the writing, etc. So so we worked out our company structure when we were at Central.
I'd also say that sort of like collaborative process is something that our course gate is like really like encouraged, I would say. I feel like they loved a bit of collaboration. So I feel like that's probably, to be honest, that is the most that I think we're most sort of stuck to.
So let's move on to your creative process, and you guys are in your R&D stage right now. So I'm just curious, and what does a research and development stage look like, you know, and more specifically, what kind of tests do you do, what kind of research do you do, and how do you keep your work continuously relevant to young audiences?
Well, this process is quite an odd R&D, I would say. A normal R&D sort of occurs over like, you know, a sort of set period of time where you're in everyday type thing. But our R&D is over 2 months just at weekends, because we all have normal jobs. So we're here every Saturday and Sunday. That's how weekends work.
As well as meetings throughout the week and evenings.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Like there's no such time as free time.
No free time. And we have basically just like various specialists, or like consultants, I suppose you could call them. We had a clowning person come in for one day. We had a movement person come in one day. We have a puppetry person coming in for one day. We have a magician, a sort of illusion for stage person.
Go. Yeah, he's working on Harry Potter and the Cursed Child.
Amazing. We love you, John. And
then of course we have like the people who are on board for a longer period of time, like the composer,
designer, dramaturg.
Yeah.
So we're working with a lot of people, which is amazing. Like such a great opportunity. And then
it's a really good way to bring in like fresh ideas, and obviously like, you know, we don't have expertise in every aspect of theatre, so it's wonderful to get that.
Loads of different ideas, and we just sort of our sort of process is we sort of tend to have a bit of a writer's room at the beginning, where we sort of like try and figure out what the plot is as a whole, and then we sort of like try to then understand what like the moments of each scene are, and then sort of rearrange the scenes and stuff like that, and sort of see what the best and most logical order is and
Can I
stuff.
jump in?
Please.
And I think we do tend to work quite image based as well, like symbolism, imagery, metaphor is really important. So like, what is the key symbol in that scene? What, like, how do we, you know, show that in multiple different like scenes? And yeah, so I think we're definitely very image based as well. Yeah.
And then from there, I would say that we so like once we know what like the beats or main images of each sort of scene are and the order of the scenes, then we actually develop the scenes, which I feel like some people just sort of like start devising, whereas we sort of have a lot of we like to have a skeleton structure in place. We just love a chat.
Just chat.
We love a chat.
Yeah, and Google Docs are great.
Yeah.
So many Google Docs. Yeah.
Always. I feel like that's most of what's happening in our process.
Well, I mean, like there's a lot of like post, like once we've like decided this is what we're going to do, then there's like all of the, okay, now we've actually got to make it like, so the whole thing is scored. Sam, our composer, scores pretty much the whole hour, so original music, and there's songs in it, so we have to, and it's all pre-recorded audio so that we have lots of control over editing the audio, having lots of harmonies and layers and things, we're hoping, and also so we can have an actual child's voice for the roles of the children, because actually voice is so important when you're watching something. It'll be really jarring to have an adult's voice. Something
that we sort of dislike is, I personally dislike, is when there's something so jarring about an adult playing a child. I always find so, and the idea of like writing lines for a child and it being said by an adult, something about it just seems so like, I don't know, like quite kind of forced. So so we have a child who voices the child, and that's everything is pre-recorded in the show, but that was the base. That was why we wanted it to begin with. Was specifically for the child.
Oh, wow, that's really interesting. So the actor just kind of mounts it, or
lip syncs.
Yes, it means there is no room for error
in
the whole show.
You can't mess it at all. Yeah, but no, that's great. I would have never thought about that, but yeah, I think it would be weird to see a full-grown adult trying to voice a child. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious then, do you guys have you have a child who voices over, but do you also have like children as consultants? Do you consult children before putting up the show?
Well, so when we did the streaming in October, as I said, I showed it to sort of 11 to 16-year-olds at my school, got lots of feedback there. So yeah, it is really important to get feedback from, I suppose, our target audience, like children and families. And then like for this streaming, I think we're going to try and get more feedback and things, and I'm probably going to show it to my school kids again. So yeah, I think that's sort of where we but a lot of us do work with kids at various points. So I think we're quite reasonably in touch with what interests kids. I don't know.
No, I think you've done that perfectly.
Yeah, we all have a bit of children in our hearts anyway, so I still feel like a child. Yeah, and like I think the element of play is also so essential, right? Just, that idea of free play and free expression for children. So in your pieces, what are some like key elements that you have in your work that encourages this kind of playfulness, and so that the audiences aren't just like passive observers, but they're really immersed in the world that you're creating?
I would say that clowning is something that is very much that, because that's like so often to do with your relationship with the audience. So that's definitely like a really like sort of big part of that sort of like I think there's only one character in the show who sort of acknowledges the audience in that way. So that's like a lovely playful moment. But I would also just say that it just sort of has a general, our show has these sort of like peaks and troughs of sort of emotion. So like while there will be some like quite sad moments, they are very much followed by
joyful, playful, and that mirrors the way that children puddle jump, which is something that we've been talking about with grief charities and also with our clinical psychologists. The idea that children jump in and out of these puddles of grief, so they'll be really down, and then the next moment they'll be asking what tea was, and in a way that adults can't sort of as quickly pull out of the moments of grief. So I think that our structure of like the up and down of our play really mirrors puddle jumping. But also I think something going back to clowning is finding the games in the scene. So there's a lot of like obstacles in the way of the journey of the child that we follow in the play. So it's the games of how do they get around them, how do they sort of trick them, how do they, all of that. Anything else? I think that's and I guess it's just about like layers, like having things that adults will enjoy, things that younger children will enjoy.
Definitely. I think
we got it all.
Yeah, that was lovely.
Yeah, actually that's interesting. You just brought up the point about like having things that both adults and children can enjoy, because obviously the children are accompanied by their parents, right? And so then do you sometimes feel a need to make your work accessible to parents or adults as well, or do you find that making it work for children is enough?
Well, I would say that we something that's quite important to us as a theatre company is that we don't even like often consider the fact that we are like making theatre for children. It's just that we're making like theatre that people will enjoy, and that means that children will enjoy it and adults will enjoy it. I think that's like really important to us. Yeah,
it's maybe like something that we really fight against, that sort of idea that theatre for children should be happy-go-lucky. It should be rainbows and sunshine and sort of bubbly. I think that if you like look at sort of a lot of children's media, like films and stuff like Coraline, it's super dark, super twisted, very scary to watch as an adult, scary to watch as a child, I would argue. So I think there's definitely like this idea, and this was one of the things that we were criticized for initially, like in our first review ever, that we weren't sort of happy-go-lucky, that
that it was too dark for
children,
sardonic,
stylized, dimly lit.
But that to us is a compliment. Yes. Like to be sardonic and stylized, fantastic. Amazing.
And like Peter at artistic director of Applecart said that like the things that you're criticized for early on as a company can sometimes be your strengths later on when you're more successful. So I think it's always important to think about, like, not take everybody's opinions to heart. So that's our viewpoint. That theatre can be theatre is theatre.
I think so. I very much think so. I think we have sort of like movement bits and clowny bits and jokey bits that I genuinely feel like can be enjoyed by like young or old audiences. And that's
And going back to what you said about like the inner child, like all adults have that inner child to like, recall back to.
We all absolutely love children's films. I feel like we all are just sort of like, so have you seen this new kids film? So I feel like we sort of are all very connected to that inner child. Nonetheless.
So then how have you found yourself changing and developing from doing this? Like do you see that this has helped with your own personal development in terms of your own inner child?
Fun question. That's tricky, isn't it? I feel like as in terms of as theatre makers, we've developed in terms of, I think we've had to have more of a business mind. Because we went into this a year ago being like, we'll do these things, and that's how we get money, and like it's not how it works. So I think having a business mind, always thinking like what is our target audience, what are we trying to convey, how do we I think that's important, and something we maybe didn't see the value in initially. I don't know about like, I guess,
but I feel like also just like creatively, because we've tried so many new things, like we're having actual like big musical numbers in this version of the show. So we've sort of been writing, like essentially doing like musical theatre songwriting, which is like very fun and like a really like fun challenge for us that we've been loving.
I think also like sort of solidifying what we as a company, our aesthetic, our brand, like what sort of stories do we want to tell. I think it's given us a really good sort of experimentation in finding what that niche is in this process.
Definitely. And I also feel like in terms of, I keep talking about clowning, but I know, but in terms of the clowning stuff, that like that is very much that sort of like inner child, like the sort of there's a lot of like naivety in clowning that I feel like is very fun to explore, that is like yeah, I don't know, just sort of curious about, there's sort of that curious approach to the world that a clown would take, that I feel like if you're talking about like how we developed up in a child, I feel like that's something that is very much that.
Yeah, tell me more about clowning. Like, what are some aspects of clowning that you find allows for this, and some exercises or how you can incorporate clowning into your work?
So it depends on if you truly want to have like sort of clowning in the actual show, then that sort of like is the engagement with the audience, is that sort of like actually like making eye contact with the audience and sort of directing things at them, which is something that we've discussed quite a lot, as whether we want to break the fourth wall or not, because we're never sure. We're still sort of discussing that. But even just in terms of like some like warm-up exercises that we were doing last week with our clown specialist Leonie, it's just sort of stuff like seeing where you naturally go with stuff, like because it's sort of that idea that everyone has this like inner personality that is their like clown type. And I think it was Katie's, for example, it was like incredibly confident, like Helen's was very like endearing and sort of like goofy, and mine was quite like serious and stiff. And it's just sort of like all these sort of different things that sort of instinctively come out of you, that's quite interesting to explore in terms of the performance.
That's so interesting. I think maybe to kind of cap off the discussion, I'm really curious about how you see your company developing, and like other potential topics and plays that you'd like to explore, or even things beyond plays. Like, are there other mediums that you guys have been thinking of going into in the near future or far future too?
We're always obsessed with saying that Finding Percy Iris should be a like a children's book, and it should be an audio book.
You know, one of those ones that you like follow through while you had the headphones on. I used to love those.
I feel like it would be so cool. It'd be so gorgeous. Yeah. So that's like a pipeline dream. But we're definitely interested in making more shows in the future. Yeah. It always feels odd to brainstorm topics when it's like when we are approaching taboo topics, because then it just sort of feels like we're making a list of serious things. Yeah. But the thing is, there is so much stuff that's taboo that we could potentially broach. So like it's very and they're like really important topics, and that people sort of acknowledge are really important topics. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was just gonna add, like, I think that like going forward, so we've got the stream on the 3rd of July, and then we're hoping to take it on tour. But I think we do want to try and develop a piece between the streaming and the tour, because obviously that's quite a long time. So yeah, I mean, if anyone has any suggestions, please do let us know. But I think we've definitely, as I said, we've established sort of what our sort of like aesthetic style is, and like I think we definitely do want to like pursue the music more. Like we've got a long-time collaboration with Sam McDonald, who's the composer on the show. So yeah, I think more musical numbers, exploring like how music and sound can sort of help us tell a story. Yeah, and I think just sort of like seeing where this takes us and how we can grow as a company. Yeah. So.
Beautifully put, Suze.
Yeah.
Actually, wait, I don't want to end this. I have one more question. Yes, I think it will be nice to just hear about your ethos for the company, because I hear like bits and pieces throughout this conversation, but if you have like a way to put it in a few sentences, maybe you can let us know, because I think that I really love the way that you guys see how children should be interacted with as like normal human beings, and putting yourselves on the same level as children, that they are human beings that we interact with. So I'd like to hear about that.
So our sort of like strapline is always like Elephant Talk Theatre. We create theatre and workshops exploring sensitive topics, addressing the elephant in the room. So that's always our sort of like elevator pitch slogan. And I'm trying to express, and
I think it's like collaborative devising. It's sort of like this side. I always do this movement when I'm talking about the structure of our company, because it's like, oh, someone sees a gap, oh, you fill it. Oh, someone sees a gap, you fill it. So it is sort of collaborative in its purest form.
I think it's also it's making theatre for we make theatre for young audiences, but we like really don't approach it as theatre for young audiences, I would say. And I also feel like that's, you know, as Susie mentioned in that review or other things, is that like a lot of people will have that response of like, oh god, that sounds dark, or even in our like sort of like slightly like Twisted Timber-esque aesthetic type stuff, like people are like, oh, that's not for the children, but it is. I loved that. We all loved that, like as children. So I feel like we just want to make more of that. And it's that children know that the world is a scary place, and that's something that,
and you don't need to necessarily like
coddle them from that.
It's about opening discussions.
Truly, it's sometimes so much more like harmful to coddle someone and not
not give them the information they need in order to exist in the world as is.
All right, thank you guys. No, I mean, I think opening up healthy discussions for children is really important, and I'm sure your work kind of is that like jumping point for these discussions for children to have with their parents or anybody else. So I think you guys are doing great work, and I wish I could see it. Maybe I can watch a stream version somewhere. This is really
July.
3rd
of July.
Plug that. 3rd of July. You hear that? Thank you guys so much again. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Amelia. Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Thank you for having us. Lovely chat.
Thank you. Bye. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Look out for a summary pack that will be up on our Instagram, and continue these conversations into your own lives. Make sure to follow us on our socials to find out what else we have been up to, and do look out for our other episodes.